Mr. Barr is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Undersecretary Estevez, question about BIS licenses. You and I have talked about this before. Appreciate the work that you're doing. Last year, I asked you how many BIS licenses were approved for companies that wanted to do business with entities on the Department of Defense 1260H list. That's the Chinese military companies, or the Treasury list, the NSCMIC list, the Chinese Military Industrial Complex list. Your response was that you needed to get back to me. That never happened. Let's try again this year. Do you know how many BIS licenses were approved for companies that wanted to do business with entities on the DoD 1260H list or the CMIC list?
I don't know that answer. I know.
Don't you? Can I just say, that's okay. You don't know. Well, maybe it's okay, but don't you think that's a really important question for BIS?
Here's what I would say. You and I have had this dialogue, and we'll continue to have it because I think we're making progress on the overall list harmonization issue, which is the real point that I think you want to get at, so that when an exporter looks, whether they're at SDN on OFAC or whether they're on the entity list or they're on the DoD list, which actually has a completely different use case, so it's really not in the same vein, that the exporter knows that they need a license to come and get it. And then, of course, licensing policy on the entity list, mostly is presumption of denial, but there are some variances to that. An exporter actually looks at a consolidated list. They see all that when they do that, so they know. For us, we just put out a rule this week, yesterday in fact, related to OFAC and entity list synchronization related to Russia. There's other things that we can do in that. So there is progress in that.
Why would Commerce ever issue a license for an American business to export or do business with a Chinese military company or a Chinese military industrial complex company? What possible interest do we have in that, in granting that license?
If again, if they're on the entity list, it depends on when the policy is set and how.
And I'm not saying we may not, but I want to know what would be the interest of the United States in issuing that license.
For the most part, there is none.
Okay.
For the most part, it is a presumption of denial. There are licenses, frankly, to give desks and chairs and stuff like that.
All right.
Which would be weird that the Chinese would be buying desks and chairs from us, but so be it. Okay, I'll take that trade.
Okay.
But for stuff that's meaningful to a military organization, no.
Okay, well, we just want you to stay on top of that. I don't think members of Congress on either side of the aisle are really interested in issuing licenses to do business with Chinese military companies.
Neither is the Undersecretary of Commerce, by the way.
All right. Emerging and foundational technologies, Secretary Estevez, under the Export Control Reform Act, BIS is required to keep a list of emerging and foundational technologies, implement controls on those technologies, and work to establish multilateral controls with other countries and report the results to CFIUS and Congress, including the House Foreign Affairs Committee. When was the last time BIS submitted this required report to Congress?
I believe our last report went out last year.
And Undersecretary Fernandez, as the person responsible for states' participation on CFIUS, have you received this report from BIS?
I personally do not know the answer to that question. I can go back and check. We have other colleagues in my bureaus who are more directly responsible for CFIUS.
Well, it's 2024. We passed this bill in 2018. We got to get on it. And ECRA implementation has been painfully slow, and we want Commerce and we want state to be on top of it. So let's keep that going.
If I could, Congressman, under FIRMA, which again, I got to testify before your committee and for FIRMA, and I'm glad that it passed. CFIUS does not need to see any list to understand where to put controls and what investments to make. CFIUS is working the way it should, but we do share technology requirements with CFIUS, which I happen to have a say in.
My time has expired, but I want to just make the point that whether we do sector-based investment controls, Mr. Chairman, or whether we do sanctions or both, what we want, and I know the chairman shares this view, what we want is precision and certainty and clarity for the American private sector. So implementation of the executive order or legislation we're working on, we don't want the private sector to be guessing. We want the American private sector to know what is red light and what is green light. That's what the export control system has achieved largely over the years, and we want that to be the case with outbound capital flows as well.
Concur with you, Congressman.
I yield.